My friends and I were trick-or-treating a few years ago when we were around 12 or 13 years old. This was our first year going out without our parents, so we were excited to have some freedom. Running around the neighborhood, collecting candy, and just having fun was all we wanted to do. Every year before Halloween, we planned our trick-or-treating route. We made sure to hit all the biggest houses, hoping to score some full-size candy bars. That year, a new row of luxury homes on Birchwood Lane had just been finished, and people had recently moved in. We decided to start there and then work our way through other neighborhoods afterward. The new street wasn't too far from my house. On Halloween evening, we all met up at my place, eager to head out. We stopped at a few houses along the way to grab some candy, but eventually, we turned onto Birchwood Lane. To our surprise, there weren't any other kids around. We figured we were just early, and it made us excited to think we'd be the first ones to grab candy from the big houses. We ran up to the first house where a kind older man gave each of us a full-size Snickers bar. We were thrilled. It felt like we were off to a great start. But as we continued, things got strange. At the next house, nobody answered. The same thing happened at the house after that. In fact, the next 10 houses were completely dark, and no one opened their doors. The houses on this street were massive, with long driveways and large yards. Walking from one to the next took 2 to 3 minutes. After so many unanswered doors, we started to feel like we were wasting our time. Finally, we spotted the biggest house on the street. It had a grand entrance, a long winding driveway, and lights glowing from every window. We decided to try this one before giving up on Birchwood Lane altogether. As we walked up the driveway, I noticed a woman looking at us from a small window near the door. As soon as I made eye contact with her, she quickly stepped back and disappeared. I figured she was just waiting for us to come closer. When we reached the porch, I rang the doorbell. Almost immediately, a smiling woman opened the door. Standing behind her was another older woman, the same one I'd seen in the window earlier. "Trick or treat," we called out. The woman smiled wider and opened the door further, revealing a large round table inside their spacious entrance hall. The table was covered with every kind of candy you could imagine. Mini candy bars, lollipops, gummies, chocolate, and more. I was stunned. It was hard to believe someone would spend that much on Halloween candy, but in a house like this, I guessed it wasn't too surprising. The woman invited us in, saying we could each pick 2 pieces of candy. Without hesitation, we stepped inside and hurried to the table. We were ecstatic, looking through all the options and deciding what to take. As I debated my second choice, I heard the door slam shut behind us. Startled, we all turned around. The woman was standing by the door, still smiling. She said, "Stay right here. I forgot to put out some dessert for you to take on your way out. I'll be right back." She quickly walked away down a hallway, disappearing from sight. I glanced around and realized the other woman was gone too. My friends and I exchanged nervous looks. Something about this didn't feel right. Just then, we heard footsteps coming toward us, heavy, deliberate steps echoing down the hallway. Without thinking, I bolted for the door. I yanked it open, yelling for my friends to follow me. We dashed down the driveway, not stopping until we were far from the house and back on the main street. Behind us, we heard the woman calling, "Wait! Come back!" Her voice was high and unsettling. When we finally reached my house, we collapsed on the driveway, out of breath and terrified. None of us could understand what had just happened. What were those women trying to do? What would have happened if we'd stayed? We thought about telling my parents, but we were too scared of getting in trouble. They'd warned us plenty of times never to go inside someone's house, no matter what. So we decided to keep quiet. After a while, we continued trick-or-treating in my neighborhood. This time, we stuck to areas where there were other kids around and stayed on high alert. To this day, my friends and I still talk about that Halloween. Every year we wonder what the women in that house on Birchwood Lane were planning and what could have happened if we hadn't run. It remains the strangest, creepiest Halloween experience of my life. Last year was the first time I ever lived completely alone in a house. I had just rented a small place in a quiet neighborhood called Maplewood Heights. It was closer to my new job, so the location was perfect. I moved in early September, but most of the neighbors seemed to keep to themselves, so I did the same. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal. It was a peaceful area, and I didn't mind the solitude. Soon, Halloween rolled around. I noticed only a couple of houses on the street had decorations up, just a few pumpkins or a sign here and there. Nothing extravagant. Most homes looked like their owners didn't celebrate Halloween at all. Still, I decided to participate in the spirit of the holiday. I put a small trick-or-treat sign on my door and bought one small bag of candy. Back where I used to live, I'd always buy 3 or 4 large bags because the neighborhood was busy with kids. But here, I didn't expect many visitors. One bag seemed like enough. The afternoon came and I got a few small groups of kids at the door. That was it, though. By 8:30 p.m., the streets were quiet. I was a bit disappointed because I always enjoyed Halloween, even if it was just handing out candy. By 10 p.m., I figured the night was over. I put the remaining candy in the pantry and sat on the couch to watch a scary movie. It was my way of ending the evening with a little Halloween tradition of my own. I was halfway through the movie when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 11 p.m. A little confused and slightly annoyed, I got up and checked the peephole. Standing on my porch was a small boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old. His costume was homemade, nothing specific, just black fabric with red accents and a matching black mask. I opened the door and he said, "Trick or treat." I was a bit concerned. It was so late and he appeared to be alone. "Wait here," I said. I went to the pantry, grabbed a handful of candy and returned to the door. As I dropped the candy into his pillowcase, I looked around, expecting to see his parents or maybe a group of friends waiting nearby. But there was no one. The street was empty. The boy turned around and walked off without another word. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him go, but he disappeared into the darkness. Feeling uneasy, I closed the door and went back to the couch. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time, I went straight to the pantry, grabbed the entire bag of candy, and headed to the door. When I opened it, I was startled to see the same boy standing there. This time, he didn't have his pillowcase or any bag to hold candy. "Are you okay?" I asked. He didn't answer. I glanced past him and noticed a figure standing in the driveway across the street. It looked like a grown man, wearing a costume similar to the boy's, a black outfit with red accents and a mask. "Is that your dad over there?" I asked. The boy hesitated before quietly saying, "Yes." "Why did you come back?" I asked. The boy didn't reply right away. Then he muttered, "I wanted more candy." I was confused. He didn't even have a bag, but I held out the candy anyway. He reluctantly took one piece, then turned and ran off. Feeling creeped out, I locked the door and went back to the couch. I tried to focus on the movie, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. It was late by then, so I decided to call it a night. As I walked toward the stairs, I noticed a light flash outside one of the windows. I froze. It was the motion sensor light by my garage. Nervously, I peeked out the window but didn't see anything. After a few minutes of waiting and watching, I closed the blinds and headed upstairs to my bedroom. I lay in bed, thinking about the strange encounter with the boy and the man. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I heard a soft rustling noise. It was followed by loud, heavy bangs on my front door. I shot up, my heart racing. Quietly, I made my way downstairs. The banging continued, 3 more deafening knocks that made me jump. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing inches away was the man I had seen earlier across the street. He was still wearing the creepy black and red costume and mask. Something glinted in his hand, but he was too close for me to see what it was. My chest tightened. There was no way I was opening that door. I ran upstairs, grabbed my phone, and locked myself in the bedroom. I called 911 and whispered to the operator about what was happening. The banging on the door continued for another minute before it stopped. I sat frozen, listening intently. Then, I heard the sound of glass shattering. It came from the kitchen downstairs. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized the man had broken in. I had no way to defend myself if he came upstairs. Thankfully, moments later, I heard the faint sound of police sirens. As they drew closer, I heard footsteps rushing out of the house. I waited until the officers called out for me before I unlocked my door and went downstairs. They searched the house and confirmed the man was gone. They found a broken kitchen window where he had entered, but nothing was stolen. I stayed at a hotel for the next few days, too scared to sleep at the house. To this day, I wonder if the man had used the boy as a distraction to gain entry into my home. Now it's been almost a year. Halloween is just a week away, and I can't help but feel paranoid. I keep thinking the man might come back to finish what he started. When I was a kid, I lived with my parents in a small neighborhood. Halloween was never really a big thing as far as trick-or-treating and stuff, so we'd always do something else. One thing my dad and I always loved doing on Halloween was exploring creepy or abandoned places together. It's funny, I would never do this kind of thing alone or even with friends. But with him, I felt safe, and I was never scared of what we might find. At least, up until this day. After driving around for a while, we found a worn-down barn. This thing had to be vacant for years. The siding was half gone and the roof was caved in. If it wasn't for the little slivers of paint here and there, you would have never known it was red. We maneuvered around broken glass and slabs of wood, finding left-behind tools and garbage. Then I saw it, a cute little scarecrow perched up on the side of the barn. I pointed to it, and my dad led the way. But the closer we got, the worse it started to smell. Poor guy, I heard my dad say as I looked down. It was a big, wild raccoon lying motionless not too far from the scarecrow's feet. "What do you think killed it?" I asked. He examined it for a bit as I looked back up toward the figure. Then I froze. It was staring right at me. I could have sworn it was looking straight off into the distance before, but now its eyes had shifted onto me. Still smiling and sitting upright, but just the eyes had moved. "Dad," I called out. He didn't respond. I looked over at him, and he pointed at the raccoon with a more disgusted look this time. Then I saw what he was looking at. All of its insides were missing, and usually there would be a big mess or something, but the strange part about this was that it was hardly noticeable unless you looked closely. I didn't want to, but I looked up at the scarecrow once more. My stomach sank as I realized it was still staring at me, but its eyebrows, that were once raised, were now furrowed, and its smile was gone. Then I started to notice the scattered bloodstains seeping through its raggedy clothes. I felt a sickness come over me, and I got really dizzy until my dad put his hand on my shoulder. "Probably just a coyote," he said. Then he started leading the way out. His words made me feel better, but I wasn't too sure if I believed it. As we walked away, I looked back at the scarecrow, and it was just how we found it, looking off into the distance and smiling with its eyebrows high. I never told my dad, as I wasn't quite sure if what I saw was real or not, and I didn't want him to worry that I was seeing things and stop taking me on adventures anymore. I still have no idea what I was seeing, or if it was even real at all. But what creeped me out the most was that my dad went back a few days later to sketch the barn with my brother. When he came back, he showed me the pictures, but on them, there was no scarecrow.